Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about proposals in technical communication. Proposals, according to Lannon and Gurrick's Technical Communications textbook, attempt to persuade an audience to take some form of action. And this is my favorite definition. It's simple, it's to the point, and that's exactly what proposals do. Proposals are meant to attempt whoever you're submitting them to take some type of action, whether that be providing money for a project or setting up a project, providing a budget for an addition of books to a library within your community. It could be for various items that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. But moving forward, let's talk for a second about types of proposals. So there are informal and formal. An informal proposal might take the form of an email or a letter. And in an informal proposal, those are the kind of documents that go back and forth between an employee and his or her manager, or even another company they're working with on behalf of the company they're with. And it takes this form because maybe whatever's going on with, say for instance, there's a big project and it's been approved, but you're trying to make something move faster and you've been given approval by your boss to make things move faster, and instead of having to go through the formal pieces of proposal planning and creating the documentation, they give you the go-ahead to either create an email or draft a letter containing the information in a more direct and informal way, or they'll give you the permission to send an email or a letter trying to establish a connection or make a deal even before this formal proposal goes out. So sometimes they're not separate. Sometimes they actually work together. Most of the time they're separate. So occasionally these can work hand in hand. Because the formal proposals, such as the planning proposal, the research proposal, the sales proposal, there's all different types that you can find when you're in the workplace. And it really depends on what field you're in, and it depends on the type of company you're working for. If it's a company that's working on something cutting edge, if they're into software development, for instance, they can come up with a type of proposal that no one else really needs. And so it could be called XYZ proposal. And no one else has it, but your company needs it. So proposals can be that specific, and in other cases they can be very general. The planning proposal and research proposal, as well as the sales, these are very generic types of proposals, and they can be either solicited or unsolicited. Solicited proposals are the ones that are requested by your manager, a client, or a customer. Unsolicited proposals are the ones that are not requested, but it's something that you might have an idea for, or that your team has a really good idea for, and so you decide to create this proposal. Now, one thing to keep in mind that is, because the audience for a solicited proposal has made a specific request, you won't need to spend time introducing yourself or providing the same background material that you would for an unsolicited proposal. So some of the information that you need to provide in those becomes a bit different. It depends on who you're writing to, what you're writing about, etc. Now, the planning proposal, it offers typically a solution to a problem or a suggestion for an improvement, and it can be doing anything from requesting funding to extend hours for a community library, or it can be a formal proposal to request that your company provide recycling bins in addition to the trash bins that they have throughout your facilities. It can be something like that. There's a lot you can do with that. Research proposals, those are a lot of fun, and they tend to be some of the most common that you run across, and some of the more in-depth that I've found. These are also called grant proposals. So grant proposals typically request funding for some type of study, and they're used often within universities, within the medical field, and sometimes they're used within corporate, but most of the time they're not. And these can become quite in-depth and can include like details for a thesis project or an independent study, and typically you include an analytical or pieces of an analytical report to go with that one. And I've seen grant proposals can range anywhere from 2 pages long, which is very rare, to 250 pages long. In grant writing, a lot of grant writing is done for charitable and organizations and nonprofits. So think things like Free Store Food Bank is one of them, one of the local organizations that uses grant proposals or research proposals to get funding for some of their programs. And they're able to do things like expand programs that they have so that they can include additional areas and schools into things like their free lunch backpack program and things like that. And if you look online, you'll be able to see lots of examples of additional proposals. I'm not including them here because I could go on and unfortunately give you a lecture that's 2 hours long, and I know that you're not going to want one of those here. In addition to this lecture, I will include a lecture or two, or excuse me, a clip or two of some grant writers that I know of that can tell you a little bit more about grant writing so that you can see some of the documentation and learn a bit more about what you're talking or what they're talking about there. With sales proposals, it's exactly what it sounds like. Sales proposals offer services or products that they're either solicited or unsolicited. It's kind of a toss-up with those. And again, depending on your audience, you may have to provide different information. Obviously, if you are providing a solicited proposal, you aren't going to have to introduce yourself because your manager knows who you are. But if you're providing an unsolicited proposal, you're going to have to provide additional information, introducing yourself, the various products, etc. let's move on to talk about writing effective proposals. Now, while I can't give you tons of advice over the next few minutes about writing effective proposals, I can give you some high-level tips that can make you successful in proposal writing. First, as with anything that you write, you want to make sure that you keep your audience and purpose in mind. For whichever type of proposal you're trying to write, first make sure you know which type of proposal you're trying to write. If you don't know, then that's a serious problem. So identify what type of proposal you're trying to write. You should know whether it's solicited or unsolicited. At that point, you're going to want to keep your audience in mind. Think about what information your audience needs. Think about the purpose of the information that you're trying to convey to your audience. What exactly are you trying to motivate them to do? Why are you trying to motivate them to do it? Next, remember to use the rhetorical triangle. Remember ethos, pathos, and logos. You're going to want to use these when you're trying to persuade your audience. So remember, ethos appeals to ethical appeal or ethical persuasion. Pathos is an emotional appeal. And logos is a logical appeal. Each of these have their strengths and their low points or weaknesses. So decide what you want to use and decide what works best for your proposal and for your audience. Make sure that you provide clear information and that you're as realistic as possible. And feeding directly into that, promise only what you can deliver. Don't try to promise anyone the moon and stars if you know that realistically you're not going to be able to do it. Or don't promise that your program will be able to complete something in an unreasonable amount of time. Make sure that whatever information that you're providing within your proposal, that it's readable. Look at font sizes, look at colors. So for instance, you'll notice this black background on my slide here, and that I use a neon green and white within my fonts. If I write in navy blue, you're not going to see it as well on here. And I'm aware of that, not just based on logic, but from experience as well. And sometimes when you're creating a document, not only do you need to have, make sure that it's readable literally, but make sure that you go over your wording, read through the document, proofread, read it out loud, maybe even have it, somebody, one of your colleagues or your manager, take a look at your work to see if they can read it as well and understand what you're saying. And I like to put this little Dilbert cartoon in here. Make sure you don't do this. So don't just make up any kind of numbers or anything like that. I know everybody in here that's in my class and anyone who's obviously watching this video, you're clearly not the kind of person who's going to make up any kind of statistic or fact or figure. But it does, it's one of those things I do have to say. Make sure that you don't just make up a number or provide, a guesstimate. Get your numbers as close as possible. Nail them down. Be realistic, etc. You don't want to make up numbers like that. It can come back to bite you. And not only are you representing yourself in this you're always representing your company, whether it's your own company or it's a company that you're working for. And such things can also have legal repercussions as well. So a typical writer who is working in technical communications, whether it's for grant proposal writing, aka research proposal writing, or if you're working any number of jobs and you've just been asked to provide the lead work on a sales proposal, whoever you are, a writer of an unsolicited proposal moves through decisions about situation, audience, problem, and purpose. And so I'm going to take you through the steps of what you would have to go through or what you should address when you're drafting out an unsolicited proposal. First, you're going to think about situation. Your reader or your audience has a problem or a need and has hopefully asked you to submit a proposal. But wait, this is unsolicited, right? They haven't asked you to write it. You've decided to write it. Or your team has decided to write it. This is unsolicited. So you have to figure out, what is the problem or need? What's going on here? What's the problem or need that you need to be solving or fulfilling? Next, think about the audience in general, not just their problem or need. When you're writing the proposal, you're going to be thinking about, obviously, somebody other than me, right? You're going to be thinking about whomever is picking up this proposal and reading it. You're also going to be thinking about who is making the key decisions regarding your proposal. And chances are it's more than one person. Chances are you're looking at a group of people who are going to be looking at your work, including several groups within your own organization. So base your decisions on who they are, what they already know. Don't sit around and spend too much time telling them things that they already know. Tell them what they do need to know. You might have to remind them about the need that you're trying to fulfill for an unsolicited proposal. Go ahead and do that quickly. Don't spend too much time on it. But keep in mind, you can have those multiple audiences. So you may have a primary audience and a secondary audience. Figure out what their technical level is or their technical understanding and write to that level. Next up, I want you to think about the problem. So an effective proposal is going to be persuading an audience to take or support a recommended action, right? So what's the specific problem? What's the specific response that you want them to take? Make sure that you make this detailed. Make sure that you make this easy to follow. Make a straight line to it. And then beyond understanding the problem, you want to make sure that you enable any of the readers within your audience or audiences to understand all aspects of the problem and to be able to evaluate the soundness of your plan. Because really, you're not just solving their problem, you're giving them a plan for solving it or fixing it. And it can be a quick plan or a plan that requires many steps. Either way, make sure it's something that they can evaluate. Last but not least, Think about the purpose. So from your precise focus on the problem grows your statement of purpose. And because you're going to have a summary of your plan for solving the problem within a proposal, you also want to make sure that you guide your decisions a bit. And you want to make sure that you do that by figuring out what you want to include in the text and what you should not include. It's occasionally quite reasonable to provide alternatives to your own alternative when you're trying to talk somebody into something. Sometimes you can be even more persuasive by saying, well, you know, there are other solutions out there, such as this or that. And that can be helpful. But you want to make sure that you're strategic with it. Don't provide too many other solutions that you don't want them to buy into. Don't be too persuasive against your own work. And with that, another thing I want to warn you about, PowerPoint poisoning. It's a thing. Yeah, there have been many studies out, and I feel like I'm going back to the previous comic strip where I'm just making up figures here, but I'm not going to give you any statistics. But there have been studies conducted over the past 10, 15 years that have went into detail about how persuasive and how helpful PowerPoint presentations can be. Typically, they're not as effective as a lot of other ways of communicating. Now, for lecturing online, I'm a bit limited in what I can do. But a lot of times people can kind of get confused and get a little PowerPoint poisoned if you try to make them watch too many slides. And that's why I chose to have just a few slides here. So think about that also whenever you're trying to persuade someone of any kind of message. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Have a great day.